The morning sun cast long shadows across the stone courtyard of Buckingham Palace. Thomas Mitchell stood perfectly still in his red uniform and tall bearskin hat. His black boots were polished to a mirror shine. His white gloves were spotless. He had been a royal guard for 7 years, and he knew the rules by heart. Never move. Never speak. Never break formation. These rules were sacred. Tourists crowded around the palace gates, cameras clicking constantly. Children pointed at the guards. Adults tried to make them smile or laugh. Thomas stared straight ahead, his face like stone. This was his duty. This was his honor, but today felt different somehow. Thomas couldn't explain it, but something in the air seemed to whisper that this would not be an ordinary day. Across the city, in a small hospital room, 8-year-old Emma Richardson lay in her bed. The room was decorated with colorful drawings she had made. Pictures of castles, princesses, and guards in red uniforms covered the walls. Emma's blonde hair had fallen out months ago from the treatments. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, but her blue eyes still sparkled with life. Emma's mother, Sarah, sat beside the bed holding her daughter's small hand. Sarah's eyes were red from crying, though she tried to hide it. The doctors had given them the news yesterday. There was nothing more they could do. Emma had weeks, maybe days. Emma looked up at her mother with those bright blue eyes. She spoke in a soft voice that barely rose above a whisper. "Mummy, do you think we could go see the royal guards one more time? Before I go to heaven?" Sarah's heart shattered into a million pieces. She blinked back tears and forced a smile. "Of course, sweetheart. Of course we can." For 3 years, since Emma was 5, she had been obsessed with the royal guards. She had books about them. Toy soldiers in red uniforms lined her hospital windowsill. She had visited Buckingham Palace 6 times before she became too sick to travel. She would stand at the gates for hours, watching the guards stand so tall and proud. Emma always said she wanted to be brave like them. The next morning, Sarah pushed Emma's wheelchair through the hospital corridors. Emma wore her favorite pink dress and a knitted cap to cover her head. She looked so small in the wheelchair, so fragile, but she smiled with excitement. "We're really going, Mummy? Really truly?" "Really truly," Sarah said, her voice catching in her throat. The taxi ride seemed to take forever. Emma pressed her face against the window, watching London roll past. Every red bus, every black cab, every landmark made her gasp with delight. She pointed out things to her mother as if seeing them for the first time, even though she had lived in London her whole life. When they arrived at Buckingham Palace, Sarah paid the driver and carefully helped Emma from the taxi. The little girl insisted on trying to walk, holding her mother's hand tightly. They made it only a few steps before Emma's legs gave out. Sarah quickly brought the wheelchair and Emma sat down, breathing hard but still smiling. "Look, Mummy, there they are." 4 royal guards stood at attention near the gate. Their red uniforms blazed in the sunlight. Their tall hats made them look like giants. Emma's face lit up with pure joy. Thomas Mitchell was one of those 4 guards. He stood at his post, eyes forward, barely blinking. The morning had been busy with tourists. Now as afternoon approached, the crowd had thinned slightly. He could see a woman pushing a wheelchair toward the gates. The woman looked tired, sad. The child in the wheelchair wore a pink dress and a knitted cap. Something stirred in Thomas's chest, a feeling he quickly pushed down. Guards don't feel. Guards don't react. Guards stand still. Sarah wheeled Emma as close to the gate as the barriers allowed. Emma gazed up at the guards with wonder and admiration. She whispered to her mother, "They're so brave, Mummy, so strong." Thomas could hear the little girl's voice. It was weak but filled with awe. He kept his eyes forward, but he was aware of her presence. Painfully aware. Emma reached into her small backpack and pulled out a piece of paper. It was a drawing she had made. A royal guard standing tall with a big smile and hearts floating around him. At the bottom, in shaky letters, she had written, "Thank you for being brave. From Emma." Sarah took the drawing and approached the barrier. "Excuse me," she called softly to the nearest guard. Not Thomas, but the guard to his left. "My daughter made this for you. She admires you all so much." The guard didn't move, didn't blink. Couldn't acknowledge her. Sarah understood. She knew the rules. She folded the drawing carefully and tucked it into a small gap in the fence, wedging it so it wouldn't blow away. "Thank you anyway," she whispered. Emma watched this with understanding beyond her years. She didn't seem disappointed that the guard hadn't responded. "It's okay, Mummy, they have to be strong. They can't break the rules." Thomas saw the drawing from the corner of his eye. He saw the little girl's face so pale and thin. He saw the mother's grief barely contained. Something deep inside him cracked. Just a little. Just enough to let doubt seep in. The rules were clear. Never move. Never acknowledge. Never break formation. But looking at that sick child, that brave little girl who admired them so much, Thomas felt the rules suddenly seem less important than the moment before him. Emma and her mother stayed for 20 minutes, just watching the guards. Emma told her mother stories about each guard, making up adventures they might have had. That one probably saved a prince from a dragon, she said, pointing at Thomas. He looks very brave. Thomas heard every word. Each sentence from that weak little voice drove deeper into his heart. He had stood through rain, through snow, through heat. He had ignored taunts, ignored attempts to make him laugh, ignored everything. But this was different. This wasn't someone trying to break his concentration for fun. This was a dying child who saw something noble in what he did. When Sarah finally said they needed to go, that Emma needed to rest, the little girl looked back one more time. She raised her thin hand and waved at the guards. "Thank you for letting me visit," she called out softly. "You're all my heroes." Thomas watched them leave from the corner of his eye, the wheelchair growing smaller as the mother pushed it away, the pink dress disappearing into the crowd. The brave little girl who would probably never return. Something shifted inside Thomas Mitchell that day. Something fundamental and irreversible. He didn't know it yet, but his life had just changed forever, and he was about to break every rule he had ever sworn to uphold. Thomas Mitchell couldn't stop thinking about the little girl in the pink dress. That night after his shift ended, he walked to the changing room in silence. The other guards chatted about football matches and weekend plans. Thomas said nothing. He removed his red uniform carefully, hanging it with precision. He changed into his civilian clothes, but his mind was miles away. At home in his small flat, Thomas sat at his kitchen table with a cup of tea growing cold in front of him. He kept seeing those blue eyes, that brave smile, that thin hand waving goodbye. He had stood guard for 7 years. He had seen thousands of visitors. Why did this one child affect him so deeply? Thomas had joined the Royal Guard because he believed in duty, in honor, in serving something greater than himself. His grandfather had been a guard. His father had been a guard. It was family tradition. It was sacred. But tonight, the rules that had always seemed so important felt hollow. He pulled out his phone and did something he never thought he would do. He searched for information about sick children at London hospitals. He didn't know which hospital. He didn't know the girl's last name. He only knew Emma, and that pink dress, and those eyes full of wonder. Meanwhile, across the city, Emma lay in her hospital bed struggling to breathe. The visit to Buckingham Palace had exhausted her completely. Sarah sat beside her, holding her hand, watching her daughter fight for each breath. The nurses came in every hour to check vital signs and adjust medications. "Mommy," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. Today was the best day. Sarah's tears fell silently onto the white hospital sheets. "I'm glad, sweetheart. I'm so glad, but the guards were so wonderful, so brave. Do you think they liked my drawing?" "I'm sure they loved it, baby." "I'm absolutely sure." Emma smiled weakly and closed her eyes. Sarah watched her daughter sleep, knowing that each sleep might be the last. The doctors had said days or weeks. But looking at Emma now, Sarah wondered if they even had days. The next morning, Thomas returned to his post. The drawing was still wedged in the fence where Sarah had left it. During a brief moment when his commanding officer walked past, Thomas had carefully retrieved it, folding it quickly and slipping it into his uniform pocket. It was against regulations. Guards weren't supposed to accept gifts. But Thomas didn't care anymore. During his lunch break, Thomas sat in the guard's rest area and carefully unfolded the drawing. The Royal Guard in the picture stood tall and proud, surrounded by hearts. The shaky handwriting at the bottom read, "Thank you for being brave." From Emma. A fellow guard, Marcus, sat down beside him. "What's that, mate?" Thomas showed him the drawing. Marcus studied it carefully, his expression softening. "Someone's daughter made this for you?" "A little girl who visited yesterday. She was sick, very sick. You could see it just by looking at her." Marcus handed the drawing back. "That's rough, man. But you know we can't acknowledge visitors. It's the rules." "I know the rules," Thomas said quietly. "I've followed them for 7 years. But what if the rules are wrong? What if there are times when being human is more important than being a perfect soldier? Marcus looked uncomfortable. Don't talk like that, Thomas. You could get discharged for breaking protocol. Is that what you want? Thomas carefully folded the drawing and put it back in his pocket. I don't know what I want anymore. That afternoon, during his shift, Thomas did something unprecedented. When no officers were watching, he took out his phone and sent an email to the palace administration. He wrote about Emma, about her visit, about her drawing. He asked if there was any way, any possible way, to do something special for a dying child who loved the royal guards. He knew it was a long shot. He knew the answer would probably be no, but he had to try. 3 days passed with no response. Thomas went through his duties mechanically. Stand at attention, march in formation, change the guard, repeat. But his heart wasn't in it anymore. Every time he looked at visitors, he searched for a pink dress, for a knitted cap, for blue eyes full of wonder. Emma never returned. On the 4th day, Thomas received a response to his email. It was from a senior palace administrator named Margaret Thornton. She asked him to come to her office after his shift. Thomas's stomach churned with worry. He was probably going to be reprimanded, maybe even dismissed. You don't break protocol and ask for favors without consequences. Margaret Thornton's office was filled with photographs of the royal family and official documents. She was a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and gray hair, pulled into a neat bun. She gestured for Thomas to sit. Guard Mitchell, she began. I received your email about the little girl named Emma. Thomas sat rigidly, his hands clasped in his lap. Yes, ma'am. I apologize if I overstepped. I just thought Margaret held up a hand to stop him. You didn't overstep, Thomas. You did something remarkable. You saw a child in need and you wanted to help. That takes courage. Thomas was speechless. This was not the response he expected. Margaret continued. I did some research. I contacted several London hospitals. I found Emma Richardson. She's at St. Mary's Hospital. Stage 4 cancer. The doctors give her less than a week. Thomas felt his chest tighten. Less than a week. That brave little girl had less than a week. I also learned, Margaret said gently, that her dying wish is to meet a royal guard, to talk to one, to hear stories about what they do. It's all she talks about, according to her mother. Thomas looked up sharply. Is there something we can do? Can I visit her? I know it's against protocol, but Margaret smiled. I've spoken to the commanding officer. I've also spoken to the royal household. They've agreed to make an exception. One exception. For Emma. Thomas could hardly believe what he was hearing. An exception? You may visit Emma Richardson at St. Mary's Hospital. You may wear your uniform. You may speak with her. Answer her questions. Make her dream come true. But Thomas, you must understand something. This can never happen again. This is a one-time allowance for a very special circumstance, and it must remain private. No press, no publicity. Just a dying child and a kind guard. Do you understand? Thomas nodded, unable to speak. Emotion welled up inside him, threatening to overflow. There's one more thing, Margaret said. Emma doesn't know you're coming. Her mother doesn't know. It will be a surprise. We've arranged it for tomorrow afternoon. A car will pick you up and take you to the hospital. You'll have 1 hour with Emma. Make it count, Thomas. Make it unforgettable. That night, Thomas couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about what he would say to Emma. How could he make 1 hour meaningful enough to carry her through her final days? What stories could he tell? What comfort could he bring? He thought about his grandfather, who had served as a royal guard during World War II. His grandfather used to tell him stories about duty and honor, but also about compassion and humanity. The uniform doesn't make you inhuman, his grandfather once said. It makes you responsible for representing the best of what humans can be. Tomorrow, Thomas would represent the best of humanity. Tomorrow he would step outside the rules to make a dying child's dream come true. And tomorrow, both he and Emma would be changed forever. The drawing sat on his bedside table, the hearts around the guard seeming to glow in the moonlight streaming through his window. Thank you for being brave. From Emma. Tomorrow, Thomas thought, he would thank Emma for teaching him what true bravery really meant. The black car arrived at Thomas's flat at exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon. He had spent the morning polishing every button on his red uniform until they gleamed like jewels. His bearskin hat sat perfectly straight. His white gloves were spotless. But unlike every other time he had worn this uniform, Today his hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his collar. The driver, an elderly man named George who had worked for the palace for 30 years, smiled at Thomas in the rearview mirror. "Nervous, lad?" "Terrified," Thomas admitted. "I've stood guard in front of thousands of people without flinching. But the thought of meeting one 8-year-old girl has my stomach in knots." George chuckled softly. "That's because this matters more than all those other times combined. You're not just standing still today. You're bringing joy to someone who desperately needs it." The drive to St. Mary's Hospital took 20 minutes through London traffic. Thomas watched the city pass by, thinking about Emma. What would he say first? Should he salute her? Would she be too sick to enjoy the visit? 1,000 worries raced through his mind. At the hospital, a nurse named Patricia met them at the entrance. She was a woman in her 40s with warm brown eyes and a gentle smile. "You must be Guard Mitchell. Emma's room is on the 3rd floor. But before we go up, I need to prepare you." Thomas straightened. "Prepare me?" Patricia's expression grew serious. "Emma is very weak today. She's having trouble breathing. She sleeps most of the time now. Her mother is with her constantly. They don't know you're coming. We thought it best to make it a surprise to give Emma something wonderful to wake up to." Thomas nodded, his heart heavy. "I understand." They took the elevator to the 3rd floor. The pediatric ward was decorated with colorful murals of animals and rainbows. But underneath the cheerful decorations, Thomas could sense the sadness that permeated this place. This was where children came to fight battles that weren't fair, battles they didn't choose. Patricia stopped outside room 307. Through the small window in the door, Thomas could see Sarah sitting beside a bed, her head bowed, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. In the bed, nearly invisible beneath white sheets, lay Emma. She looked even smaller and paler than she had at Buckingham Palace. "Are you ready?" Patricia asked softly. Thomas took a deep breath. "As ready as I'll ever be." Patricia knocked gently and opened the door. Sarah looked up, her face streaked with tears, her expression confused. "Yes, Mrs. Richardson," Patricia said with a smile. "There's someone here to see Emma." Thomas stepped into the room, his tall form in the brilliant red uniform seeming to fill the entire space. Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She stood up quickly, nearly knocking over her chair. "What? How? I don't understand," Sarah stammered. Thomas removed his bearskin hat respectfully and held it under his arm. "Mrs. Richardson, my name is Thomas Mitchell. I'm a royal guard at Buckingham Palace. I was there the day you and Emma visited. I saw her drawing. I heard her words. And I couldn't stop thinking about your brave daughter." Sarah's eyes filled with fresh tears. "You came here? For Emma? If it's all right with you, I'd like to spend some time with her. I'd like to answer any questions she might have. I'd like to make her dream come true." Sarah couldn't speak. She simply nodded, tears streaming down her face. She reached out and squeezed Thomas's hand with both of hers. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." Emma stirred in the bed, her eyelids fluttering. Sarah quickly moved to her side. "Emma, sweetheart. Wake up, darling. There's someone very special here to see you." Emma's eyes slowly opened. For a moment she seemed confused, disoriented. Then her gaze landed on Thomas standing in his red uniform and her eyes went wide. She tried to sit up but didn't have the strength. "Mummy," Emma breathed. "Am I dreaming? Is there really a royal guard in my room?" Thomas stepped closer to the bed and knelt down so he was at Emma's eye level. He smiled at her warmly. "You're not dreaming, Emma. I'm really here. My name is Thomas and I'm honored to meet you." Emma stared at him in complete wonder. Her thin hand reached out tentatively as if afraid he might disappear if she touched him. Thomas gently took her hand in his gloved one. "You came to see me?" Emma whispered. "Really, truly?" "Really, truly," Thomas said, echoing the words he had heard her say to her mother that day at the palace. "I saw your beautiful drawing, and I heard you say we were your heroes. But Emma, I have to tell you something important. You're wrong about who the real hero is." Emma looked confused. "What do you mean?" Thomas squeezed her hand gently. "I stand outside a palace every day. I wear a fancy uniform. People take my picture. But you know what? That doesn't make me brave. It's just my job. But you, Emma Richardson, you're fighting a battle every single day. You wake up when you're tired. You smile when you're hurting. You find joy even when things are scary. That's real bravery. That's real courage. You're the hero, Emma, not me." Tears rolled down Emma's pale cheeks. Sarah stood behind them, crying silently, her hand over her heart. Emma's voice was barely a whisper. "Can you tell me about being a royal guard? About the palace? I want to know everything." Thomas settled into the chair beside her bed, his tall frame somehow gentle and comforting. "I can tell you everything. Where should I start?" "At the beginning," Emma said, her eyes bright despite her weakness. "Tell me everything from the very beginning." For the next hour, Thomas talked. He told Emma about training to become a royal guard, about learning to stand perfectly still for hours, about the first time he wore the uniform. He told her about funny moments when tourists tried to make him laugh, about the time a pigeon landed on his hat and refused to leave, about marching in formation during the changing of the guard. Emma listened to every word, her eyes never leaving his face. She asked questions in her weak voice, and Thomas answered each one patiently and thoroughly. He showed her his bearskin hat, letting her touch the soft fur. He explained each part of his uniform, every button and badge and their meanings. Sarah watched from the corner of the room, amazed at the transformation in her daughter. Emma looked more alive than she had in weeks. Her eyes sparkled. Her smile never faded. For this 1 hour, she forgot about being sick. She forgot about pain and fear. She was just a little girl talking to her hero. Thomas told Emma about the Queen, about state ceremonies, about standing guard during important events. He made her laugh with stories about the strict rules and the serious training. He made her feel special by telling her that she was the only person in the world who had ever been visited by a royal guard in full uniform. "You're that important, Emma," he said seriously. "You're more important than any ceremony or any rule." As the hour drew to a close, Thomas could see Emma growing tired. Her eyelids were heavy. Her voice was fading. But she fought to stay awake, not wanting the moment to end. "Emma," Thomas said gently, "I need to tell you something before I go." Emma's eyes opened wider, fighting exhaustion. "Don't go yet, please." "I have to, sweetheart. But listen to me carefully. Every single day when I stand guard at the palace, I'm going to think of you. Every single day I'm going to remember your bravery. And whenever I feel like giving up or feel like something is too hard, I'm going to ask myself, what would Emma do? Because you, little one, are the bravest person I've ever met." Emma smiled through tears. "Will you remember me? Even when I'm gone?" Thomas's voice cracked with emotion. "I will remember you every single day for the rest of my life. You've changed me, Emma. You've made me a better person, and that's a gift I can never repay." Thomas stood slowly, his knees stiff from kneeling beside Emma's bed. He carefully placed his bearskin hat back on his head, straightening it with practiced precision. Emma watched every movement, memorizing the way he looked, the way his uniform caught the light, the kindness in his eyes. "Before I go," Thomas said softly, "I have something for you." From inside his uniform, he pulled out a small pin. It was a Royal Guard badge, the kind only guards were allowed to wear. It was against every regulation to give it away, but Thomas didn't hesitate. He leaned down and carefully pinned it to Emma's hospital gown. "This makes you an honorary Royal Guard," Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've earned it through your courage and your strength. You're one of us now, Emma. You always will be." Emma's thin fingers touched the badge gently, reverently. "I'm really a Royal Guard?" "The bravest one I've ever known," Thomas confirmed. Sarah stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. She hugged Thomas tightly, this stranger who had given her daughter the most precious gift imaginable. "Thank you," she sobbed into his uniform. "Thank you for making her so happy. Thank you for seeing her, really seeing her." Thomas hugged her back, his own eyes wet with tears he no longer tried to hide. "Thank you for sharing her with me. She's an extraordinary person. You've raised an incredible daughter." Patricia, the nurse, appeared at the door. She smiled sadly, pointing to her watch. The hour was up. Thomas had to leave. Emma's voice rose in panic. "No, don't go yet. Please." Thomas returned to her bedside and took her hand one more time. "Emma, listen to me. I have to go back to the palace now. But you know what? Every time you close your eyes, you can imagine me standing guard. You can imagine me standing tall and strong, thinking about you. And I will be thinking about you. Every single moment, promise?" Emma whispered. "I promise," Thomas said solemnly. "Cross my heart." Emma smiled through her tears. "You're my best friend, Thomas. My very best friend in the whole world." Thomas felt his heart break and heal at the same time. "And you're mine, Emma. You always will be. He stood one final time, gave Emma a proper military salute, and then quietly left the room. In the hallway, he leaned against the wall, his hands shaking, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Patricia stood beside him, saying nothing, just offering silent support. "She's dying," Thomas said, his voice hollow. "That beautiful little girl is dying, and there's nothing anyone can do." Patricia nodded sadly. "Yes, probably within the next few days. But Thomas, you gave her something precious. You gave her joy. You gave her a dream come true. That's more than most people get in their final days." Thomas wiped his eyes with his white gloves, not caring that he was staining them. "It's not enough. It's not fair. She's just a child." "No," Patricia agreed. "It's not fair. Life rarely is. But you made her life better. That has to count for something." The drive back to Thomas's flat was silent. George, the driver, didn't try to make conversation. He simply drove, occasionally glancing at Thomas in the rearview mirror with sympathetic eyes. When they arrived, Thomas thanked him quietly and went inside. That night, Thomas lay in bed unable to sleep. He kept seeing Emma's face, hearing her weak voice, feeling her thin hand in his. He had met her for only an hour, but she had changed something fundamental inside him. The rules that had governed his life for 7 years suddenly seemed meaningless compared to the connection he had made with that brave little girl. For the next 3 days, Thomas went through his duties like a robot. He stood at his post at Buckingham Palace. He marched in formation. He changed guard. But his mind was always at St. Mary's Hospital in room 307 with Emma Richardson. He had given Patricia his phone number and asked her to update him on Emma's condition. Each morning he checked his phone with dread and hope fighting in his chest. Each morning Patricia's message was the same. "Emma is still with us. She talks about you constantly." On the 4th day, Thomas's phone rang during his lunch break. He saw Patricia's name on the screen and his heart dropped. This was it. This was the call he had been dreading. "Hello?" Thomas answered, his voice barely steady. "Thomas," Patricia said gently. "Emma asked for you. She's asking if you can come back. She doesn't have much time left. Maybe hours. Sarah wanted me to call you, to give you the choice. There's no obligation. You've already done so much." Thomas was on his feet immediately. "I'm coming. Tell Emma I'm coming." He found his commanding officer and explained the situation. The officer, a stern man named Colonel Harris, listened without interruption. When Thomas finished, expecting to be denied, Colonel Harris surprised him. "Go," the colonel said simply. "Family emergency. Take the rest of the day. Be with that child." Thomas changed out of his uniform quickly, throwing on civilian clothes. He caught a taxi to the hospital, his leg bouncing nervously during the entire ride. When he finally reached room 307, Sarah met him at the door. She looked exhausted, destroyed. Her eyes were swollen from crying. Her clothes were wrinkled from days of living at the hospital. But when she saw Thomas, she managed a small smile. "She's been waiting for you," Sarah whispered. "She refused to sleep until you got here. She said she needed to tell you something important." Thomas entered the room. Emma looked tiny in the hospital bed, even smaller than before. Her breathing was labored, assisted by an oxygen mask. But when she saw Thomas, her eyes lit up. She tried to smile behind the mask. Thomas rushed to her side and took her hand. "Hey there, honorary guard. I hear you wanted to see me." Emma nodded weakly. She pulled the oxygen mask down slightly so she could speak. Each word was an effort. "Thomas, I wanted to say goodbye, properly." Thomas felt tears streaming down his face. He didn't try to hide them. "Emma, you don't have to—" "Listen," Emma interrupted, using what little strength she had left. "Thank you for being my friend. Thank you for making my dream come true. I'm not scared anymore, because I know you'll remember me." "Every single day," Thomas promised, his voice breaking. "For the rest of my life," Emma smiled. "Will you stay with me until I fall asleep?" Thomas nodded, unable to speak. He pulled his chair close to the bed and held Emma's hand in both of his. Sarah sat on the other side, stroking her daughter's hair. "Tell me a story," Emma whispered. "About the palace. About the guards. About brave people." Thomas took a shaky breath and began to speak. He told Emma about legendary guards throughout history. About brave men and women who stood strong in the face of danger. About honor and courage and duty. But mostly, he told her about a little girl he once met who taught a grown man what real bravery looked like. Emma listened, her breathing growing slower and more peaceful. Her eyes closed. Her grip on Thomas's hand gradually loosened. Sarah cried silently, her hand never leaving her daughter's hair. Thomas kept talking, his voice soft and soothing, even as his heart shattered. He talked about Buckingham Palace lit up at night, about changing seasons in London, about how Emma would always be remembered as the bravest guard who ever lived. Emma's breathing grew softer, quieter, more peaceful. Her face relaxed into a gentle smile. She looked like she was having a beautiful dream. And then, with Thomas holding one hand and Sarah holding the other, with stories of bravery and honor filling the air, Emma Richardson took her last breath. The room fell silent except for Sarah's heartbroken sobs. Thomas sat frozen, still holding Emma's small hand, unable to process that this brave little girl was gone. Patricia entered quietly, checked Emma's vital signs, and nodded to Sarah with tears in her own eyes. Thomas finally released Emma's hand and stood on shaking legs. He looked down at her peaceful face, at the Royal Guard badge still pinned to her hospital gown, at the little girl who had changed his life forever. He came to attention and gave her one final salute, perfect and precise, a soldier honoring a fallen comrade. "Rest now, brave one," he whispered. "Your duty is done." The funeral was held on a gray Tuesday morning at a small church in North London. Rain fell steadily, as if the sky itself was mourning Emma Richardson. Thomas stood at the back of the church in his civilian clothes, watching as people filed in. There were relatives, friends, teachers, nurses from the hospital, and children from Emma's school. So many people whose lives had been touched by one small, brave girl. The church was decorated with Emma's artwork. Her colorful drawings covered every available space: castles, rainbows, flowers, and royal guards in red uniforms. In the front, beside the small white casket, sat the drawing Emma had made and left at Buckingham Palace. "Thank you for being brave. From Emma." Sarah had framed it and placed it on an easel next to a photo of Emma smiling, wearing her pink dress and knitted cap. Thomas felt like an intruder. He had only known Emma for such a short time. These people had loved her for years. What right did he have to be here? But Sarah had personally called him and asked him to come. "Emma would have wanted you there," she had said through tears. "You were so important to her." The service was beautiful and heartbreaking. Emma's teacher spoke about her determination and her kindness to other students. A nurse from St. Mary's talked about Emma's bravery during treatments, how she would comfort other sick children even when she was in pain herself. Emma's aunt read a poem Emma had written about angels and soldiers and protecting people you love. When it came time for Sarah to speak, she walked slowly to the front of the church. She looked fragile, like she might shatter at any moment. She stood at the podium and looked out at the gathered mourners, her eyes red and swollen. "My daughter," Sarah began, her voice shaking, "was the strongest person I've ever known. She faced death with more courage than most adults face life. She never complained. She never asked, why me? She just kept finding reasons to smile, reasons to hope, reasons to love." Sarah paused, taking a shaky breath. In her final weeks, Emma's dream came true. A royal guard from Buckingham Palace visited her. He spent time with her. He talked to her. He made her feel special and important. He showed her that kindness and compassion are more important than any rule or regulation. Sarah's eyes found Thomas in the back of the church. "Thomas Mitchell, that royal guard, is here today." Emma talked about him constantly after his visit. She said he was her hero. But Thomas told Emma something that I'll never forget. He told her that she was the real hero, and he was absolutely right. Thomas felt every eye in the church turn toward him. He wanted to disappear, to sink into the floor. But he met Sarah's gaze and nodded slightly, acknowledging her words. "Emma's life was short," Sarah continued, "but it was full of love. She touched so many people. She taught us about bravery, about grace, about finding joy even in darkness. My daughter was a warrior, and now she's at peace." After the service, people gathered at Sarah's home for a small reception. Thomas almost didn't go. He felt out of place, like he didn't belong in this circle of grief. But something pulled him there. Some need to be close to Emma's memory just a little longer. Sarah found him standing alone in the corner, holding a cup of tea he hadn't touched. She walked over and hugged him tightly. "Thank you for coming, Thomas. It means everything." "I wouldn't have missed it," Thomas said honestly. "Emma was special. She changed my life." Sarah pulled back and looked at him with sad, grateful eyes. She talked about you constantly in those final days. You made her so happy. You gave her something to look forward to, something to be excited about. That's a gift I can never repay. You don't need to repay anything, Thomas said. Emma gave me far more than I gave her. She taught me what real courage looks like. She reminded me why we wear the uniform, not to follow rules blindly, but to serve people, to protect what's precious, to stand for something that matters. Sarah reached into her pocket and pulled out the Royal Guard badge Thomas had given Emma. I found this in her hospital gown. I thought you might want it back. Thomas shook his head. That belongs to Emma, it always will. She earned it. Then I'd like you to have something else, Sarah said. She left briefly and returned with the framed drawing. Emma made this for you for all the guards, but I think she'd want you to have it, to remember her by. Thomas took the frame with trembling hands. He stared at the drawing, at the smiling guards surrounded by hearts, at Emma's shaky handwriting. Thank you for being brave. From Emma. I'll treasure this forever, Thomas whispered. In the weeks that followed, Thomas returned to his duties at Buckingham Palace. He stood guard, he marched in formation, he followed protocols. But everything was different now. He was different now. The rules that had once been everything to him were now guidelines, important but not absolute. What mattered most was the reason behind the rules, the purpose they served, the people they protected. Other guards noticed the change in Thomas. He was quieter, more thoughtful. During breaks, they would find him staring at a small framed drawing he kept in his locker. Some asked about it. Thomas would simply say, "A friend gave it to me." A very brave friend. Colonel Harris, the commanding officer, called Thomas into his office 1 month after Emma's funeral. Thomas stood at attention, expecting a reprimand for his behavior, for breaking protocol, for visiting a civilian while in uniform. Instead, Colonel Harris gestured for him to sit. I've been watching you, Mitchell. You've changed since that visit to the hospital. You're still a good guard, but you're different. More human, perhaps. Thomas wasn't sure how to respond. I apologize if I've failed in my duties, sir. Failed? Colonel Harris shook his head. You've excelled, Mitchell. You reminded us all why we serve. It's not about being perfect statues. It's about representing the best of what people can be. That little girl saw something in us, something noble and good, and you honored that by being there for her. The colonel stood and walked to the window overlooking the palace grounds. I received a letter from Emma Richardson's mother. She wrote to the palace, to the royal household, expressing her gratitude. She described what your visit meant to her daughter, how it gave Emma peace in her final days. Thomas felt his throat tighten with emotion. Emma was extraordinary, sir. She taught me more in 1 hour than I learned in 7 years of service. Colonel Harris turned back to face him. I'm recommending you for commendation, Mitchell. What you did wasn't by the book, but it was right. Sometimes the most important rules are the ones written on our hearts, not in our handbooks. Thomas was stunned. Sir, I don't deserve a— You do, Colonel Harris interrupted firmly. You stepped outside the rules to serve a higher purpose. That's what honor really means. That's what bravery really looks like. After leaving the colonel's office, Thomas walked to his post for his afternoon shift. As he stood at attention outside the palace, he thought about Emma. He imagined her watching him from somewhere beyond, proud that he was standing tall and strong. He remembered her words, "You're my hero," but Thomas knew the truth. Emma was the hero. Emma was the brave one. Emma was the one who faced death with courage and grace. Emma was the one who taught him that rules matter less than compassion, that duty means serving others, that true strength comes from the heart. Tourists crowded around the palace gates, taking photos, trying to make the guards smile. Thomas stood perfectly still, his face impassive, his posture perfect. But inside, his heart was full of memories of a little girl in a pink dress, full of gratitude for having known her, full of determination to honor her memory every single day. A young girl, maybe 6 years old, approached the barrier. She held a small toy soldier in her hand, a miniature royal guard. She waved at Thomas shyly. He couldn't acknowledge her, couldn't wave back, couldn't smile. But he thought of Emma. He thought of bravery and kindness and breaking rules for the right reasons, and in that moment Thomas Mitchell understood that Emma's legacy would live on. Not in monuments or memorials, but in moments like this, in the connection between a guard and a child, in the reminder that behind every uniform is a human being with a heart, in the knowledge that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is to care. 1 year after Emma's death, Thomas Mitchell stood in the same spot where he had first seen her. It was a crisp autumn morning, and golden leaves swirled around the palace grounds. The tourists were out in full force, cameras clicking, children laughing. Everything looked the same as it had a year ago. But everything was different. Thomas was different. Every morning when he put on his uniform, he thought of Emma. Every time he stood at his post, he remembered her blue eyes full of wonder. Every time he wanted to complain about sore feet or a long shift, he thought about a little girl who fought for every breath and never complained once. Emma had become his compass, his reminder of what truly mattered. Sarah Richardson had stayed in touch with Thomas. They exchanged emails occasionally, sharing memories of Emma, supporting each other through grief. Sarah had told Thomas that she was starting a foundation in Emma's name, dedicated to helping sick children have positive experiences during their treatment. She asked if Thomas would be part of it. He agreed immediately. The Emma's Dream Foundation launched 6 months after Emma's death. Its mission was simple: to grant wishes for terminally ill children, to bring moments of joy into lives filled with pain and fear. Sarah worked tirelessly, channeling her grief into something positive, something that would honor her daughter's memory. Thomas became an ambassador for the foundation. On his days off, he would visit sick children in hospitals wearing his uniform, bringing smiles and hope. He told them about Emma, about her bravery, about how one small girl had changed a grown man's understanding of courage. The children loved these visits. Their parents wept with gratitude. Word of the foundation spread. Donations came in from across the country, from people who had heard Emma's story and wanted to help. The royal household officially endorsed the foundation, recognizing it as a worthy cause that aligned with the values of service and compassion. On the 1-year anniversary of Emma's death, the foundation organized a special event at Buckingham Palace. It was unprecedented. Sick children from hospitals across London were invited to meet the royal guards, to ask questions, to take photos, to feel special. Palace administrators had initially been hesitant, worried about breaking protocol and setting precedents. But Sarah had persisted, and eventually they agreed. One day, for one special event, the rules would bend. 20 children attended, each battling serious illnesses. They arrived in wheelchairs and with oxygen tanks, with bald heads and pale skin, with tired eyes that had seen too much suffering. But when they saw the royal guards lined up in formation, when they heard the military band play, when they were welcomed into the palace courtyard, those tired eyes lit up with wonder. Thomas was part of the ceremony. He stood with the other guards as each child was introduced, as each was given a special tour, as each was made to feel important and valued. He watched these brave children laugh and smile, and he saw Emma in every single one of them. After the formal ceremony, the children were invited to meet the guards individually. Thomas found himself surrounded by kids asking questions, touching his uniform, marveling at his tall hat. He answered every question patiently, made every child feel heard and seen. One little boy, maybe 7 years old, tugged on Thomas's uniform. The boy was in a wheelchair, his legs too weak to support him. He looked up at Thomas with serious brown eyes. "My name is Oliver," the boy said. "I'm sick like Emma was. My mom told me about her. She said Emma was really brave." Thomas knelt down so he was at Oliver's eye level, just as he had done with Emma. "Emma was the bravest person I ever met. And you know what? I can see that same bravery in you, Oliver." Oliver's eyes widened. "Really? You think I'm brave?" "I know you are," Thomas said firmly. "Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you keep going even when you are scared. That's what Emma taught me, and that's what you're doing every single day." Oliver smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his thin face. "Will you remember me like you remember Emma?" Thomas felt his heart clench. "I will remember you, Oliver. I promise. Every brave child I meet I remember. You're all heroes to me." As the event came to a close, Sarah Richardson stood in the palace courtyard, watching the children interact with the guards. She had dark circles under her eyes from sleepless nights, and her clothes hung loose on a frame that had lost too much weight from grief. But she was smiling. For the first time in a year, she was genuinely smiling. Thomas approached her, and they stood together in comfortable silence, watching the joy they had created. "Emma would have loved this," Sarah said softly. "All these children feeling special, feeling important. This is exactly what she would have wanted. She started something amazing, Thomas replied. Her legacy is going to help so many people. Sarah turned to look at him. Our daughters and sons may not live long lives, but they can live meaningful ones. Emma proved that. She touched more people in 8 years than most people touch in 80, and it's because of people like you, Thomas. People who see past the sickness, who see the person, who take the time to care. Emma made it easy to care, Thomas said. She was impossible not to love. Sarah reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. I've been carrying this around, waiting for the right moment. I want you to have it. I wrote it months ago but couldn't find the courage to give it to you until now. Thomas took the envelope, his name written on the front in Sarah's neat handwriting. What is it? A letter. From Emma, well, sort of. I found her diary after she died. She wrote in it the night after you first visited her at the hospital. I transcribed what she wrote. I thought you should see it. Thomas opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a single page, Emma's words written in Sarah's handwriting. Dear Diary, today was the best day of my whole life. A real royal guard came to visit me. His name is Thomas, and he's the nicest person ever. He told me I was brave. Me, can you believe it? He said I was braver than him. I wanted to tell him he was wrong, but maybe he's right. Maybe being sick and still being happy is brave. Maybe smiling when you're scared is brave. Maybe loving people even when you know you have to leave them is brave. Thomas gave me a special badge. It makes me an honorary royal guard. I put it under my pillow so I can keep it safe. When I'm scared at night, I touch it and I think about Thomas standing guard at the palace, being strong and brave. And then I try to be strong and brave too. I don't know how much longer I have. The doctors don't say it, but I know I'm dying. I can feel it. But I'm not scared anymore, because I know that when I'm gone, Thomas will remember me. He promised. And people remembering you, that's kind of like living forever, isn't it? If I could tell Thomas one more thing, I would tell him thank you. Thank you for breaking the rules for me. Thank you for seeing me as more than just a sick kid. Thank you for making my dream come true. Thank you for being my friend. I love you, Thomas. Even though I only met you once, I love you. You're my hero. Love, Emma. Thomas finished reading with tears streaming down his face. He couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The words on the page were a precious gift, a window into Emma's heart, proof that their brief friendship had meant as much to her as it had to him. Sarah put her hand on his arm. She loved you, Thomas. You gave her something precious in her final days. You gave her hope and joy and friendship. You changed her life. She changed mine, Thomas managed to say through his tears. She changed everything. As the sun began to set over Buckingham Palace, casting long shadows across the courtyard, Thomas stood at attention one more time. The children had gone home, the event was over, but the impact would last forever. 20 sick children had been made to feel special. 20 families had been given a moment of joy amid their suffering. 20 young people had learned that they mattered, that they were important, that they were seen. And it all started with one little girl in a pink dress who had seen nobility in a silent guard standing at his post. Emma had looked past the uniform and seen the human being underneath. She had reminded Thomas what service really meant, not following rules blindly, but serving others with compassion and heart. Thomas thought about all the royal guards throughout history. Brave soldiers who had stood their ground in battles, who had protected kings and queens, who had served with honor and distinction. They were all heroes in their own right. But Thomas knew that the real heroes weren't always the ones in uniform. Sometimes they were 8-year-old girls with cancer who faced death with grace and courage. Sometimes they were mothers who kept loving and hoping even when their hearts were breaking. Sometimes they were sick children who found reasons to smile even in their darkest moments. As Thomas marched back to the barracks after his shift, he carried Emma's letter close to his heart. Her words would stay with him forever. Her memory would guide him through every day ahead. Her bravery would inspire him when he felt weak. Her love would remind him why he wore the uniform. That night before bed, Thomas took out the framed drawing Emma had made. Thank you for being brave. From Emma. He placed it on his bedside table where he could see it first thing every morning. Then he added Emma's letter beside it, 2 precious treasures that connected him to a little girl who had changed his life. Thank you, Emma, Thomas whispered into the darkness. Thank you for teaching me about real courage. The